Good morning. Welcome to our deeper Bible study, our digging into the Bible. Our topic today is Jesus and the demons. And I'm just going to go back a little bit in time, just a little bit from last time we got together, just to review a little bit, just to catch you up, because I know it's every other week. So maybe this will be a little helpful. I have on the screen here a map of it's a territory of the time of when Jesus was on the earth. As you can see in the south, you can see Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, Galilee there. There's my arrow. My arrow can show. But Galilee's here. This is where Jesus began his ministry. Of course, there's Nazareth. He was raised there. He was born down in Bethlehem, but raised in Nazareth. And so this is kind of this side of the lake here is the Jewish side. This side over here becomes more Gentile side. A lot of Jewish communities here, a lot of Gentiles community here. Up in the top corner is one of the highest mountains of the area called Mount Hermon. You'll find this in the Old Testament. Also it's significant in the New Testament. And Caesarea Philippi is also an important location to our study today. Just knowing a little bit of the background helps. As we talked about in a few studies ago, we look at the book of Enoch. Enoch is some of the literature that these scholars call the Second Temple period writings, and a lot of the New Testament writers drew from the first Enoch account to kind of give more. They use some of the exact quotations from those literature to explain the scriptures to us. You find them in Jude, 2 Peter. They're all peppered throughout the New Testament. Paul includes them as well. So it's important to know that some of the writings of the New Testament in our Bible, some of the quotations are from the book of Enoch. And one of the excerpts from the book of Enoch is this. In this area of Mount Hermon, this is where the sons of God, the divine beings, this is where they hatched their plot. They came down to earth to Mount Hermon, this northern area right here, Mount Hermon, circled there. They swore an oath and they bound it with a curse. And they made a vow that they would now cross from the heaven to earth. They crossed the ancient boundary, a forbidden boundary, and they crossed over and they began to have marriages with women, and their children became the offspring known as the Nephilim, as you see in Genesis chapter 6, and you see them in Numbers 13, the giant clans throughout the Bible. In your Bible, you might come across these kinds of names in the Old Testament when you read Deuteronomy 2 and 3, and when Joshua is taking the promised land. These are the people that they're encountering. They're called the Rephaim, which is a location of the giants. Other times they're called the Anakim. They're always referred to giant, tall, powerful, statured beings, humans. They're also called the Emim, and you can find them in Zumim and the Amorites. These were the giant clans that Joshua and God's people fought. Now, the theological background is these sons of God wanted to create their own creation, and they created the giants. And so these giants were lethal enemies to Israel. And so they decided, these giants, their area was going to be the very land that God had promised the Israelites. That's why God has them go in there to fight them and to destroy them and to eliminate this bloodline that these angelic sons of God created that are now enemies of Israel. So you have God's sons, and you have their sons fighting each other on earth. So the earthly battle reflects the spiritual war in heaven, in the heavenly realm. One of the great kings of that area near Mount Hermon was a gigantic king named Og of Bashan. That area near Mount Hermon, the Bible refers to that general geographic area as Bashan. That's like evil, dark, away from God. The demons live there. A lot of bad things live there to the Israelites. And so one of the last remaining giant clans was there when Joshua comes in and they defeat the king of Bashan. He's one of the remnants, as you can see there, of the Rephaites, which is basically the giant clans. His bed was massive, of course. And the ancient Canaanites, this whole region, just like Ugarit. Ugarit is one of the Israel's neighbors at that time. And it refers to this very place as hell. Basically, this is where the Hades is. This is where the underworld is. This is where the origins of the underworld. And so they go on to explain that. And so Enoch gives us some background into who are these evil spirits that Jesus is encountering in the New Testament. Now, in verse 8 of the Enoch chapter 15, it says, the giants were born from the body, and the flesh will be called evil spirits on the earth, and on the earth will be their dwelling. And the evil spirits came out from their flesh, because from above they were created, from the holy watchers. That's the sons of God. They were also called the watchers in the book of Daniel. The watchers, it doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means who they are. They're divine spiritual beings in God's heavenly court. And a bunch of them rebelled. So it says from the holy watchers was their origin and the first foundation. Evil spirits, they'll be on earth, and spirits of the evil ones, they'll be called. And the dwelling of the spirits of heaven is heaven, but the dwelling of the spirits on the earth, who are born on the earth, is earth. He's basically explaining that why these demonic spirits roam the earth is because this is where they were created, and this is where they will be. And the spirits of the giants do wrong and are corrupt and attack and break. I'm going to move my screen here. Move myself up. And they fight and break on the earth and cause sorrow, and they eat no food, do not thirst, and are not observed. And these spirits will rise against the sons of men and against the women, because they came out of them during the days of the slaughter. Okay, important background. Hi, Jeanette. How you doing? And this is a great all the scriptures that these demons show up in the New Testament, from the Gospels to the Acts. And I'm just going to go over a few because they're really important. Jesus goes to this countryside, and he finds two demon-possessed men. And we're going to talk about them in a few minutes, but they come out of their chain, they're fierce, and they talk to Jesus. What do you want with us, O Son of God? Why have you come here to torment us? So that these guys are very aware of Jesus, and he's interacting with, he's confronting these demons. We also see him in the book of Acts, where Peter and the apostles were healing people, and they came across these unclean spirits. And the reason why they're referred to as unclean is because they're a bad mixture. It's an illegal mixture, so that's unclean. You had the divine sons of God marrying the daughters of men, and their children that were slain by God in the flood became these unclean spirits that roamed the earth. And they harassed the men of earth, and they harassed the women. And so the apostles were healing people from these unclean spirits, so they were kicking them out of their possession, demon possession. Paul, again, was doing more miracles. It was so extraordinary that even his handkerchiefs and aprons, people touched them, and they were sick, they got well. And then the evil spirits came out of people just by touching some of the things that Paul had touched. And so there's this interaction that the evil spirits, the demon spirits, the spirits of the dead Nephilim who are killed in the flood, they come and interact with one of the Jewish high priests named Sceva. And this is a very interesting interaction because they talk to Sceva. So in verse 14, it says, in verse 13, I adjure you by Jesus whom Paul proclaims. He's trying to do exorcism. And the 7 sons of Sceva, the evil spirit responds, Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you? And the man in whom was the evil spirit leapt on them, mastered all of them, and overpowered them. So they fled out of the house naked and wounded. So these evil spirits interact with disciples, Paul and the apostles, and they interacted with some of the Jewish priests who were trying to do some good and trying to remove these demonic spirits. We know their origins are from Genesis 6, the unclean, the illegal bloodline that these sons of God had made in Genesis 6 caused a lot of problems because they occupied the very space that the Israelites were promised that was their land. And so they had to do a lot of fighting to take back their land. And one thing I would note is that a lot of these demonic spirits roam in Gentile territories. And we're gonna explain that in a few minutes why that is, because in the Old Testament, they have a geography. They call it a cosmic geography. There was the land of God, Yahweh, and there was the outside of God's domain. So God had a particular territory, and that's where the Israelites were in the Old Testament. So they call that cosmic geography, and we're going to look at that in a few minutes. So a lot of these unclean spirits, you find them outside of God's people, in the territories where God's people were not there. They were there roaming the earth, and some were actually in God's territory. They came in there to kind of interact with some of the Jews, and we're going to look at that in a few minutes as well. So again, the Second Temple Jewish writers called these demons bastard spirits because of their the way they came about. Heavenly beings and a human, illegal, wrong mixture, not proper. These angels left their places of authority in the heavenly realms, and they came down and they became opponents, adversaries of God, of Israel. So you have this cosmic war, and you also have the war manifesting itself on earth because they wanted to get rid of God's people, the Israelites. And so they did everything they could, but again, God prevails as he always does. So last week I talked about stay spiritual, stay alert, share the gospel, because that's how you stay in the fight, because there's a spiritual war still going on, and we have to be mindful of the war. We have to be mindful that there's a spiritual active war going on that we don't see, and there's a physical war in our earth that we do see. And so just being aware of connecting those two things by sharing the gospel of Jesus. And as we slowly begin to go into all nations, that's what Jesus said, go into all nations and take back the territory that belongs to God, that was stolen by these illegal, rebellious sons of God who try to take these territories from God, like the promised land. But God's people went into the promised land and defeated them. Are there any questions up to this point? Because I'm going to begin the new section. I just did like a little recap. Jeanette, I know you're new. This might have been like, whoa, what was that? What did I just walk into? But if you go back on the YouTube, you'll find a few other lessons that kind of lead up to this lesson. So I'm doing it progressively, and I'm adding on top each layer, so you kind of get a good view of the entire scope of the series. Any questions? Any questions so far? Okay, great. So one of the questions, and Jesus takes this question to his disciples. You may remember this. This is when he asked the apostles, hey, who do people say the Son of Man is? And then you remember Peter raises his hand, or some say this, some say that. And Peter goes, you're the Christ, the Son of God. And there's that moment where like Peter gets like encouraged by Jesus. It's one of those moments that it's actually positive for Peter, because he normally puts his foot in his mouth. But Peter has this moment where it's like he realized that Jesus was the Son of God. And so in Matthew 16, Jesus takes them to the district of Caesarea Philippi. Now, when you read that, you may like, oh, okay, that's just the city. But there's a lot of geography, cosmic geography. Jesus takes them to this area. And we're going to take a look at Jesus takes them to this place. We want to know where it is and why does Jesus take them there? And at this place, he asks his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they say, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And then Simon Peter goes, hey, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered, blessed are you, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. We use this a lot in the church early on. I remember being a disciple and hearing this. I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. But I had no idea of the background of what is happening here. No clue until many, many years later. So they're on this hillside, or the base of this area called Caesarea Philippi. And the gates of hell are there. There's a rock. They're standing on this rock. Look where Caesarea Philippi is located. It's located on the base of Mount Hermon, the very place that the book of Enoch says that the sons of God came down and hatched their plot to marry women, and the location was Mount Hermon. And Jesus takes him to ground zero of the demonic rebellion in the heavenly realms. He takes him there and he asks them, who do people say I am? And so that's a significant moment, because Jesus goes out of his way to take them all the way up here into this area of Bashan, the Old Testament, where the king Og was there. He takes them all the way up there, and he does it to make a statement. He's having a confrontation spiritually in the heavenly realms. And when we read your Bible, you may not know that right away until you kind of look at the series, and you see that Jesus was going there to confront the demonic forces, to confront the devil, to confront the sons of God. He's going there for a very important reason. The reason why this area is so important, Mount Hermon, I'm going to lower my little thing here. This area is so important is because in the Old Testament, the Israel king, Jeroboam, he built a pagan worship center right in that area. This is all pagan worship, because it's where the evil descending of the angels came. And a lot of Canaanite Baal worship was there. But in Jesus's day, it was called Panias, which was dedicated to the god Pan, right? And then in Matthew 16, it says the gates of hell. That's what that area was referred to by all the ancient nations around. They called that area the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell. And so Jesus uses that as a proclamation that he's confronting the Lord of the dead, the gates of Hades, the devil. He is Beelzebub. This is where the watchers were. This is where the counterpart to the Old Testament devil is this is the location where the sons of God, where the demons hatched their plans there. I mean, the sons of God, which produced the demons, were there. You had, the devil, which was called Beelzebub, and that back in that time, that was where his name was worshipped. So what's good to note is that there's this confrontation that Jesus is challenging all the Lord of the dead, the devil himself. He's challenging the sons of God who came down. And I like the way he says about the gates of Hades. It's not that the gates of Hades are stronger than the church. He's saying that the gates of Hades cannot withstand the church, meaning it's a defensive posture that the gates of Hades is going to be taking against the disciples that are going to go into all nations. It's the kingdom that's on the attack. It's the kingdom that's on the go. And the gates of Hades are trying to hold their ground against the kingdom. So that language is important, because that's why Jesus says go into all nations, because we're not on the defense. The church is not on defense. The church is on offense. God's kingdom is on offense, and we're going to take it. But he makes this statement at Mount Hermon, which I thought was huge, because it's a huge thing. Now, there's a lot of controversy about, with the Catholics and the Protestants about, I will build my church on this rock. And the Catholics took this as to be, okay, well, Peter, he's going to have to be the first pope. And so the Catholic position on this was like, Peter has to be the leader of the original church. He's the first pope. And they start to design a hierarchy in the church that all the popes, Peter being the first one, has the power of the church. And then on the Protestant side, well, they think that I'm going to build my church on this rock. They kind of spiritualize that. They use it as an analogy of Jesus, and both of them, both positions, the scholars are telling us they're misguided, because there's more sinister things going on in the background. Jesus took them to the most darkest place possible, which was the beginning of the rebellions of the sons of God. All the background, the Canaanite worship, the dedication to Pan. This was the Mecca of evil. And so Jesus takes his disciples there. And so that is important because he's declaring in a confrontation. Now, what Jesus is attempting to do, he's provoking these powers of darkness. He's provoking them because he wants to confront them. And so how does Satan respond to this provoke? How do the powers of darkness respond to Jesus confronting them? Well, the very thing they do is they seek to kill him. That's why the devil enters Judas, because they want to kill Jesus who's living on earth. They don't want Jesus around. So the very thing they want is the very thing that ends their reign, because once they kill Jesus, he resurrects and unlocks the kingdom worldwide, and they lose their authority and they lose their power. They didn't know that killing Jesus would end their control. They didn't know by killing Jesus, they would lose all their authority. But the very thing they did by killing Jesus, it opened it up to the resurrection, which has fulfilled all the prophecies that they were unaware of. Because if they would have known that, Paul writes, they would have never killed Jesus. If the dark powers would have known that killing Jesus would have ended them, they never would have done it. And so that's a great passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. You can write that down and refer when Paul writes about all these powers. They didn't realize that killing Jesus was gonna do that. So after this confrontation, he takes him up higher toward the mountain in Mark chapter 9. He goes from Caesarea Philippi and he goes up the mountain. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led him up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth would bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud. This is my son. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but only Jesus. You know, I love that Jesus is claiming this mountain. He goes up there and reveals himself to his apostles and who he is, especially Peter and James and John. And he goes on the Mount Hermon, the mountain where the sons of God hatched their plan. He is proclaiming who he is. He is transfiguring who he is. He is showing his 3 disciples who he is. And this cloud comes down out of the cloud. This voice of God comes and tells the apostles, this is my son. Listen to him. This is a huge, huge moment. So the writers are putting this in the Gospels because they're telegraphing, they're messaging to an ancient Jew who reads this. They're going like, wow, this is intense, because that's the mountain where evil resides. And Jesus is claiming Mount Hermon as his own. He's going up there and confronting these demonic spiritual forces of darkness. Now, one of the things that Jesus does is that he confronts the demons that he runs into going about his ministry. Now, on one occasion, he goes out of his way and leaves the Jewish countryside, and he goes into the Gentile countryside. Now, this is important because the way a demon talks to Jesus outside of God's territory is different from how a demon talks to Jesus when he's in the God's territory. Remember, think cosmic geography, think nations and territories and boundary lines, okay? So in Mark 5, they came to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They call it Gennesaret. So they go from the Jewish side to the Gentile side. And when Jesus has stepped out of the boat, immediately they're met out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. There's actually 2 of them, but Mark only highlights 1. But there's actually 2, because in the other gospel, there's actually 2 of them that come out. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs, and on the mountains he was always crying out and bruising himself with stones. Remember what Enoch said, they harass men and they harass women, right? And crying out with a loud voice, he said, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. For he was saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Now, the way the demon addresses Jesus, he calls him the Son of the Most High God. To an ancient Jew, that indicates, that's a hyperlink, because that phrase is hyperlinked to Deuteronomy chapter 32, where God from the Tower of Babel changes their language and gives each language nations, and he creates boundaries and borders for people. And the nations of the earth were made from the Tower of Babel. And says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, which was at that time, God said, hey, because of your rebellion in the Tower of Babel, I'm going to give you my sons of God to rule over you on my behalf, because you are just not listening and you're rebellious. And I'm going to take Abraham and I'm going to start my nation of Israel. That's going to be my people. So he divides the nations, and he divided mankind. He fixed their borders according to the number of the sons of God. This is where God puts his agents, his people, his beings to oversee the rest of the nations, while he works with Abraham to save all the nations. That was the plan. But what happens here is that these sons of God who take over these nations, they like it, they rebel, and they're now in conflict with God. And those become the gods of the nations that you read about in the Old Testament, the gods of Egypt, the gods of Phoenicians, the gods of the Canaanites. These become the gods that you read about in the Bible. They're not made up. They're not some wooden little idols. They're actually divine beings that were given this property, this territory, but they rebelled against God and took it for themselves. And so that's the territory. That's the cosmic geography. You have the sons of God, the land of Israel, God's people. He's working with them. And then you have this other territories where the other sons of God, they ruled. And what the sons of God like to do with the sons of Israel, or God's people, they like to tempt them to worship. So one of the things that God's sons of Israel, the nation of Israel, struggled with, they worshiped other gods. And those were the gods they worshiped, these celestial beings that God had put in charge back in Deuteronomy 38. This demon is aware of that. And so he calls Jesus the Son of the Most High. Out of all the spiritual beings, God is the Most High. The reason why he's the Most High is because he made all these spiritual beings. But he is called the Most High because he is the only one that can create. The rest of them cannot create. They try to by coming down to earth and marrying women to create their own lines of unclean, illegal, forbidden mixture, and they made these giants. And so God is determined to take them off the earth, and they happen to be in the promised land. That's where they wanted to be because they knew that God would lead them there. So they wanted this confrontation. And of course, Israel ends up winning the fight in the Old Testament. Of course, the only ones that they didn't conquer were three of them, and that was Goliath and his two brothers. They went down to the Philistines, and David eventually fights Goliath in battle. That's why it's in the Bible, because he's one of the last of the giants that the story ends, because David kills the remaining giant clans that were there in the land of Israel. So cosmic geography. Here's another example of what I mean by territory. The sons of God. There's the God of there's the nation of Israel, and you have the other nations ruled by these gods, right? That God created, that they were supposed to work with God, but they rebelled. Here's a good example of the cosmic geography and the territory of demonic things, powers of darkness, and God's territory where God's people are, right? In the Old Testament. There's an interaction where Naaman, you probably heard this sermon many times about baptism. Naaman goes and he has leprosy, and his servant girl happens to be an Israelite who he captured, and she works for him now. And she says, hey, you should go talk to the prophet of God's people, Israel. He's known to cure these things. And he eventually goes. He goes and sees the prophet Elisha. Elisha tells him to dip into the Jordan, and he gets mad. And why the Jordan? It's so dirty. Why not these rivers? But look, just go dip yourself. And he does 7 times. And he comes out, and his skin is all healed. And he's like, look, I have to give you a gift. I have to, let me just give you money, treasures, and just to say thank you. Elijah goes, no, just go on your way. We're good. You're fine. But on his way out, he asks Elijah for a favor. He goes, look, now I know that there's no God in all the earth but Israel. So accept a present from your servant. But he says, Lord lives, I will not receive anything. Okay, all right. If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mules, load of earth. And in the New Testament, in the NIV talks about, I want to grab the dirt, the earth. So from now on, your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any God but the Lord. Why does he want the earth? Why does he want the ground? Why does he want to dig up with shovels, pack his mule up with all this dirt, and take it back to his nation, where he has to submit himself to a king that worships another God? Because he's trying to tell Elijah, when I go back home, when I go back to that territory, when I go back to my land, it's not the land of the God of Israel. It belongs to another God, Ramon. And my boss worships that God. So I want to take this dirt and I want to throw it on the ground where I live in another nation where there's another God. And I want to pray and worship you on that land. So I want to take this earth. I want to put it in my mules. I want to dump it on the ground near my house where I can stand on that dirt and I can worship the God of Israel. Because in their mind, it was geographical. So that's why this odd verses in the Bible, it's telegraphing to us, the reader, to the ancient Jew going, yep, that is the dark powers of darkness he's going to. He's taking God's nation, God's earth over there. That's God's property. It's where God resides. He's taking it and he's going to put it there and he's going to stand on it and he's going to worship on it. And then he asks him for forgiveness. I have to bow down because my master's old and I'm not really bowing down. It's God, but I have to do. And he goes, you're good. You're good. You're fine. So that's an interesting story. When you read it, we kind of gloss over that part. It's not usually in many sermons, but that's what it's telegraphing. There's a cosmic nations, God against the nations, cosmic battle that's going on in heaven and also on earth. And so Jesus goes across the lake and this guy says, what do you want with the Son of the Most High? That's why he says that phrase, because he understands he's in the territory of the powers of darkness. He's in their territory. He thinks he's fine. And Jesus comes over and he goes, what is your name? Because he's going to kick him out of this guy's body. He goes, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. So what's inside of this man are many of many spirits of the dead Nephilim that we have in the Old Testament. The ones that died now roam the earth, and a bunch of them possess these 2 men, really. But this guy is one. Legion, many, an army of them, right? For we are many. A legion is like 100, right? Or more than 100, like 500. And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there, and he goes, okay. So the story is not really about the pigs and drowning the pigs. That's not what the story is really about. The story is about Jesus confronting the demonic spirit. He goes out of his way to confront some of these demon spirits. And he runs into this guy who has hundreds of spirits in him. And Jesus knows where they came from, and they know who he is. And so there's this confrontation. Whenever Jesus is in Jewish territory, like Capernaum, it's on the Jewish side. The way that the demons call him is different than how the demons in the Gentile territories call him. In Capernaum, on the Sabbath, in church, in the synagogue, there was a man with an unclean spirit. And Jesus goes into the synagogues. He goes into church. Imagine someone at church today having an unclean spirit. So anyways, he goes into church. This man's attending church. He's in their synagogue. He has an unclean spirit. And then all of a sudden he yells out because Jesus is in the room. What do you have to do with us? Jesus of Nazareth. He's not Son of the Most High God anymore. He's Jesus of Nazareth. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. So it's interesting how they talk to Jesus in that territory versus how they talk to him in the Gentile territory. One, they already recognize him as the Jesus of Nazareth, the Holy One that God knows in heaven, him being God. And then Mark 5, they call him the Son of the Most High God. It's just an interesting, just the way the differences of how the demon spirits speak to Jesus directly. Any questions so far? Anything so far? I don't want to go too fast and oops.
There's a question.
Hey, Gio, it's me, Renee.
Hey, Renee.
Hey, going back to that passage where Jesus takes his disciples to that mountain, and Elijah and Moses appear.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, that mountain, you said it was, why would Moses and Elijah appear to him in that mountain? Isn't that
Moses and Elijah appearing with Jesus? He's claiming, so Jesus goes up to claim the mountain as his own. This is mine now. I'm taking it over. I'm having the confrontation, and Elijah and Moses show up with Jesus.
Is that an evil spirit? Not an evil spirit, what do you mentioned
The
something
gates of
about?
hell.
Yeah.
Yes. Why would they be there?
So
I always think that Elijah and Moses are not evil spirits.
No. When he goes up there to Mount Hermon, Jesus is having a confrontation against the demonic forces that the history of that area, the realm of that area is where the sons of God came. They hatched the plot to marry the women, created this offspring, this radical giant clans. And so Jesus' day, he goes up there, and it's still called the gates of hell, the gates of Hades. And what they believed was that was the entry into the underworld, because inside the mountain, there's this water passageway that goes through the mountain and down. And so what the ancients always thought was that must be the entrance into the underworld. So what the person in charge of the underworld is the devil. We know that because in Genesis 3, God sends him down into the underworld. If you want to be on top, I'm going to send you to the lowest part of existence, and that is the underworld. So all the dead Nephilim, all the dead Rephaim, all these giant clans who died are all in the underworld, but their spirits come out and roam the earth and harass people. So the fact that Moses is there and the fact that Elijah is there, they're just signifying two prophets. They're with Jesus. They're on his side. They're together with him. They're talking to Jesus as to show the apostles that Moses is in submission to Jesus, that Elijah was in submission to Jesus, because those two figures were so popular into the Jews that it's like the law of Moses, Elijah. Well, they were in submission to Jesus because they were submitting to Jesus and going, hey, talking, working together. You know, I'm not sure what they talked about, but imagine Peter going, oh my gosh, Elijah and Moses just showed up. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And Jesus took them up to that mountain, but he's there to provoke them, because what Jesus is trying to do, he's trying to get them to kill him. That's what he's trying to do. I'm going up there and I'm going to make these guys mad at me because I want them to kill me, because that was the plan. Now, they didn't know that plan. That's why Jesus is poking at him. He's like, come on. And he goes up there and goes, this is mine. This is my prophet. This is my mountain. And these demonic forces, they have no understanding. They have no clue why Jesus is on earth. They're going, is he doing the Garden of Eden thing again? Is he trying to create the Garden of Eden? No way. we're going to eliminate Jesus, and we're going to have all this. We're going to have all this to ourselves. What they don't realize is by killing Jesus, it takes in his resurrection, they lose all power and authority over all these nations. That's what they don't know. And so if they would have known that, that's why in the movie, Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion.
Yeah.
You see the devil at the end screaming. Ah! What the movie doesn't tell you is that by the resurrection of Jesus, it sends the signal to them that their rule is over. It's done. But what they didn't know was by killing Jesus, he would resurrect. They did not know that. They weren't in on the initial plan to save mankind. They were not involved in that discussion with God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. That's what they didn't know, because they were just created beings. They didn't know what God knew. That's why in Psalm 82, if you read that passage, God rebukes his sons of God. He tells them that one day you're going to die like men. When I punish you, you're going to die like mere men. Because when Jesus resurrects, it takes away all their authority of the nations. That's why Matthew 28 is so important. When Jesus says, hey, listen, now go into all the nations. All those territories that were part of the gods of the nations, now they're ours, because all the authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go and make disciples of all the nations. All these territories that you saw, that we discussed earlier, these territories here in Deuteronomy 8, all those nations that were there that had gods, he's saying, I have the authority now. Go into all these nations and bring the gospel to the nations there. And that was the whole plan of salvation, was for God, Jesus, to die. But he had to get them to kill him. He had to provoke them enough to do it. And he does. That's why the devil enters Judas. In John, he says he entered Judas and he left and he betrayed Jesus, and they killed him. And that was the unlocking. That was the unlocking of the mystery of how God saves the entire humankind if they're willing to follow him, of course. And so that's the background to that Mount Hermon provocation. He goes to the darkest part of the territory to confront those demonic forces, to confront the sons of God, to confront the devil, and says, on this rock, I will build my church. And that is a no-no in the demonic world. In Leviticus 16, you'll find that Israel takes these two goats. It's time to cleanse Israel of their sin. And once a year they do this. They get two goats. And one the priest puts his hands on the goat. And in the English version, it says the scapegoat. And they symbolically put all the sins of Israel, and they send the goat out into the wilderness, the darkness. That's where sin belongs, out there. Should not be with God's people. This goat has to get sent off, and they send the goat off into the wilderness because demonic forces are there. Now, fast forward that to the New Testament. Whereas Jesus, after he's baptized, he goes into the wilderness, and guess who confronts him there? Do you remember? Who confronts Jesus and tempts Jesus in the wilderness? The devil himself shows up. Geography. It's the wilderness. The devil is there. And Jesus goes to him, and he's tempted for 40 days and 40 nights. And he has a series of temptations for Jesus. So interesting geography when you know the background to some of this stuff in the Old Testament. Why the wilderness? Why did he go there? Because that's where the darkness lives. That's where the demons live. That's where everything outside of God's people, that's where they live. But God's people, we're good. But there's none of that stuff here in God's people. We're good. They don't have authority where God is. So that's why it's great as disciples. You don't have to worry yourself about demon possession, because a demon cannot enter where the Holy Spirit resides. So demon possession to a disciple, it's like, that'll never happen to us because the Holy Spirit reigns inside of us. And a demon spirit can never conquer the Holy Spirit. So it's a good thing that now our sacred space is who we are as people. So God's territory now, instead of it being nations, it's people. It's the sacred space of disciples, of followers of Jesus. That's why our Christianity is so important, because we literally have become sacred space. Every person that we help become a disciple is sacred space. And so the more sacred space of pockets we have, we can take back the nations that God sent us to save. And when enough of them are saved, then the end will come. When the fullness of the Gentiles is reached, in God's mind, a certain number or certain to his liking, then the end comes. So that's what Paul says when he writes, when the fullness of the Gentiles is reached, then the end will come. So in the meantime, we go about being disciples, we go about making disciples, and we go about understanding that we're working with God to undo what happened at Mount Hermon. We're helping God undo what the devil did in Genesis 3 when he took away our eternal life and relationship with God. We're restoring all these things with his resurrection. We can live forever. We overcome the sins of the watchers. In fact, the Old Testament already took care of that. But there's these sons of God that are still out there trying to keep control of these nations. So it's our job to pray for all the nations that the gospel will reach them and rescue them from the control of all these sons of God who are ruling that nation illegally now because of Jesus' resurrection, that we as disciples can understand that the bigger picture globally. That's why special missions is so important, because not only are we supporting these churches, that we're literally sending them out into these areas where the gods of the nations are still there and working powerfully against the disciples there and against the nations there to stop. The only thing they can do is slow us down, because time is not on their side, but they want to extend and slow down because they know the end is coming for them. They just don't know when. So they try to slow down the growth of the God's kingdom so they can stay in power. Because once the God's kingdom hits a certain point, God says the end comes and Jesus comes back and he destroys the sons of God. He takes back obviously us. So there's a whole second coming theology to it as well. But that's a good question. Any other questions?